What is the worth of survival? What price could you put on it? Typically, it depends. First, we have to actually know what survival even is. The state or fact of continuing to live or exist, typically in spite of an accident, ordeal, or difficult circumstances. Simple enough. But as always, philosophy muddies this definition. Existing in what manner? What sort of difficult circumstances? And is it even worth it? If it's not, could you make it worth it? At the end of the day, it is what it is, so we survive all the same. We live, we fight, we persist, just to live, fight, and persist again, despite all odds. Live, fight, persist. This video is centered around survival and continuity. It is also centered around Arknights' path of life. Arknights is a gacha game with one of the best worlds in fiction. I have already made quite a few videos on it, and will continue to do so as long as it's good. The protagonist of this video is Ulpianus. He's not only an interesting character, but also directly connected to every question and ideology that the path of life revolves around. In a way, this is a sequel to my Sophontheatrum video, but you don't have to watch that one to watch this one. Still, you better watch it, or else. This video will also have a similar structure to that one, which means that, first of all, we have to set the scene. The air is low in oxygen, and as humid as always. The people are polite and quiet, not sticking their noses into what they don't care about. You look up and see water. Your city is encased in a large glass dome, underwater. There are many cities like yours making up the nation of Aegir. Aegir has always been an advanced nation. It's always had access to technology from a bygone era. No one knows where this civilization went or what exactly happened to it. All anyone knows is that the things they left behind became the purpose of the Aegir. Just like many other Aegir, the people, you are a scientist. Your days are quite ordinary. You research, experiment, and occasionally debate. You also teach, but aren't great at it according to some people. But there is a big problem in Aegir. For around 200 years now, your people have been struggling against an unknowable threat. Creatures that inhabit the sea, like you, but also completely unlike you. The Seaborn. Their origins aren't clear, but what is clear is their danger. They aren't human, they're a collective. They kill and assimilate everything they come across, and for whatever reason, some people have taken to worshipping the devils, their cult known as the Church of the Deep. Then again, the Seaborn must be wiped out, not just for the sake of Aegir, but also those land dwellers. Poor things, they don't know what's going on in the ocean. Thankfully, your kind exists to keep them safe, and in the future, you will rule over them. But for now, you are stuck in a lab, experimenting like always. Yes, you. Our fish mcgee, a bummed about a scientist that has never proven anything and is broke in a civilized nation. But you also have a co-worker that goes by Ulpianus. Now that is a man that makes things work. He satisfies his lovers, unlike you. He's so much cooler than you. Everyone says it. Everyone knows it. You're just a broke loser. You don't even matter in this video. This is all about Ulpianus. Go back to work. I have some history to go over. As I mentioned in the last segment, the Seaborn have been terrorizing the Aegir for around 200 years. Before then, the people of Aegir had their sights set on space. You see, the sky in Arknights is fake. There's some kind of barrier separating space and land, and Aegir were going to break past it until suddenly the Seaborn showed up and took all the attention away from whatever the Aegirs were doing. The Aegirs had made beacons, devices, everything, all for the sake of exploring the skies. But the seaborne threat was much more urgent. So the Aegir started fighting against them. But the seaborne, whatever they are tenacious. At first, they were easy to handle, but slowly, actually quite quickly when it comes to evolution, they started assimilating different species into their genes, evolving at a rapid pace. And they have been getting harder and harder to fight against. Whatever kills them, they find resistance towards with their shared genetic codes. Seaborne are weird. At some point, something had to change. So, around 5 years ago, before the present, the Aegirs finalized a program to eradicate the seaborne once and for all, the Abyssal Hunters Project. The traces of this project actually goes back quite a bit. For a long time, some Aegirs argued that the best way to combat the seaborne is through genetic enhancements. But culturally, the Aegirs were opposed to genetic modifications because they saw it as taboo. It was inhumane. If you opened that can of worms, you would eventually reach cyborgs, from there robots, and at some point, humanity would be wiped out and replaced with something better, which again the Aegir saw as taboo. The Aegir really care about biology. Only recently did the weaponization of genes become accepted, and only because of the seaborne, around 20 years ago. And the one who led the project was a man by the name of Ulpianus. It's quite complicated, but basically, the Abyssal Hunters Project was a project in which certain qualified Aegir were experimented on and injected with seaborne genes in order for them to fight better against the ever-growing threat of seaborne becoming stronger. Normally, doing that would assimilate the subject into the seaborne hive mind, becoming seaborne. But in this experiment, they tried to make a sort of modified, vaccinated seaborne genes to inject the volunteers. And the first person to become an Abyssal Hunter was the lead scientist, Ulpianus. Ulpianus was always a genius. He was always pragmatic, more than most Aegir. He didn't deal with hypotheticals, only certainties. He was never the social type, and even as a teacher, he wasn't particularly well liked due to his eccentric nature. Something he always advocated for was asking the right questions. When it came to his classes, he would give a basic overview of the subject and demand the class to ask him questions about it. If someone asked a question he deemed to be wrong, he simply wouldn't answer. And after 3 wrong questions, he would simply move on. Not only when it came to students, but also when it came to fellow researchers and everyone else. One time, someone by the name of Secunda managed to ask him 10 questions in a row, unheard of until then. Most people could barely ask him 3 questions. Even so, by the end of his lectures, most people would come to understand the subject. Point is, he was always cutthroat, direct, and surprisingly charismatic, enough to lead not only an experiment, but later on, a military squad as well. And he always did everything for the sake of Aegir. When it came to the benefits of Aegir, he would stop at nothing, even if he had to do questionable things for Aegir's own good. Which is why, when it came to the Abyssal Hunters Project, he volunteered to be the first subject, even though he was the lead researcher, because in this case, he wasn't certain. So he felt responsible to go first, and the project turned out to be a success. Sort of. Ulpianus himself was feeble. He wasn't particularly muscular, and after becoming an Abyssal Hunter, he became much stronger. A super Aegir, if you will. So they started creating more Abyssal Hunters, but sadly, it wasn't a certain experiment. It was very theoretical, so most of the people that took the Abyssal Hunters' genes became seaborne and promptly killed by Ulpianus himself. Sacrifices for the experiment's god, if you will. He was the leader of the project, so he did whatever was necessary. Still, the Abyssal Hunters were a force to be reckoned with. They were efficient seaborn slayers, so much so that they were sent to kill the firstborn, aka Isharmla, around 5 years ago. As far as the Aegir could understand, Isharmla was the hive leader of the Seaborn. He was the father of them all. So, if they killed him, the Seaborn might actually begin to die off. And so, the Abyssal Hunters raided his nest. But things didn't go as planned. They did manage to kill the firstborn, but none survived, at least as far as Aegir was aware. Ulpianus was supposed to deal the killing blow, but due to certain things that will be revealed later, he got distracted, so instead, one of his main students was the one to deal the killing blow, a girl by the name of Scotty. In a twist that nobody could ever think of, Isharmla started possessing Scotty, his murderer, and in the end, Scotty and 2 other Abyssal Hunter women by the names of Laurentina and Gladia were the only Abyssal Hunters that survived, washing up to land. Of course, Ulpianus survived as well, but he was suspicious of everything around the Seaborn and the Aegir, so for a while, no one knew that he was alive. And again, as far as Aegir was aware, every Abyssal Hunter was dead, even if a few survived. After that, the Seaborn threat did not get any weaker to the surprise of Aegir, and the Abyssal Hunters program was deemed a failure, and Aegir decided to pursue other means of combating the Seaborn, which leads us to Arknights. No, that's serious garbage, I'm skipping it. Which leads us to Stultifera Navis, which I've already made a video on. Even so, I will do a small recap here for that juicy context. The Abyssal Hunters weren't just one squad, they were several, each with its own commander. Ulpianus led one, Gladia led another, the others dead. You see, in Arknights, Gladia, Scotty and Laurentina got together, forming a squad in Rhodes Island. But the thing is, they have no idea what has been going on in Aegir and how to get back, which leads them to Grand Faro, and from there, to Stultifera Navis. They urgently wanted to go back to see if anything had happened, and in the Stultifera Navis, Gladia comes across Ulpianus. It is in the Stultifera Navis event that we see Ulpianus for the first time. Gladia was very suspicious of Ulpianus. If he was still alive, where was he? Why didn't he join the rest of the hunters? As she saw it, there was a real possibility that Ulpianus was assimilated. While Abyssal Hunters are resistant to Seaborn genes, they aren't completely immune. But Ulpianus wasn't assimilated, nor was he simply dilly-dallying. In the Firstborn's nest, Ulpianus was the last to leave. For a while, possibly days, he bathed in Isharmla's blood, too injured to do anything else. After finally recovering, he decided to investigate everything by himself. He needed answers. In the Firstborn's nest, he saw things that shouldn't be, and because of that, he started suspecting Aegir itself of corruption, and he told Gladia exactly that they should not go back to Aegir until at least they have more information. Gladia and Ulpianus are both arrogant, but Gladia is more nationalistic than Ulpianus. The way she sees it, getting back to Aegir could only be a positive. With Aegir's tech and strength, a lot could be done. Ulpianus, on the other hand, sees things a bit differently. As I have already said, Ulpianus does everything for Aegir, even if it goes against Aegir's wishes. In those 5 years of roaming around, he walked on TERRA, saw civilization on land, foolish, ignorant, and weak. But the way they struggle and die is still harrowing. Aegir is the same. The land is flawed, and so is the sea. He doesn't think this out of sentiment. It's not philosophy, it's certainty. And what he saw in the Firstborn's lair was proof of that. That sanctuary he saw. Either way, he was here for Breogan's notes. We'll talk more about him later. And in those notes, he confirmed one of his many suspicions. that there are multiple Leviathans, multiple Isharmalas. After all, how else could the Seaborn still be getting stronger? He gets those notes from the great immaculate last knight, who cuts off Gladia and Ulpianus' conversation with his glory. Other than that, not much else of importance happens in Stulfra. At the end, the Abyssal Hunters fail to get to Aegir, and Ulpianus befriends the last knight, fighting the ocean together, which 3 months later leads us to Path of Life. Finally. First, let's go over some quick introductions to some of our fine, wonderful characters in this woefully dense and complicated story. First of all, we have Gladia, who is much more bearable in this storyline than in any other one. Then we have Laurentina, another Abyssal Hunter. She got her development in Stulfra. She ain't getting anything here. Scotty, which is dumb, airheaded and has 5 different PhDs in different scientific fields. And she's Isharmala. Kind of. We have Jordi, which is here to learn more about Breogan, and Irene, his girlfriend, which is here to take information back to Iberia. We have Kelshi, which is Whole Body, and the Doctor, which is Whole Body too! In short, they represent Rhodes Island. Secunda is here representing Aegir's police force, and Clementia is here as the leader of Miliarium, which is an Aegir city. From there, we have Blandus, which is an ethical scientist, too ethical, and Abitus, which just wants to die, and of course, the ever-glorious Last Knight. Surely I'm not forgetting anyone else in this introduction. Anyway, Chapter 1. The story starts 3 months after the Stulfra incident. You see, a week before, Aegir decided to contact Iberia, which is the closest nation to the sea, for the sake of diplomacy. They were inviting a certain number of people into the city of Miliarium, and now, a week later, the Doctor of Rhodes Island got called to Grand Faro because of... It's complicated. Remember how I mentioned that the Aegir got their tech from some sort of ancient civilization? Well, the Doctor is the only remnant of that civilization. The only 2 people that know about that are him and Kelshi, at least in this story. No one else can know. It's a closely guarded secret. A problem though is that he doesn't remember that ancient civilization. Due to prior events, he's suffering from amnesia. Still, if Rhodes Island has the very rare opportunity to visit Aegir, he should be there. Another group of people that to visit Aegir are the Abyssal Hunters. This invitation was as much of a shock to them as anyone else. Aegir was always a closed-off nation. While it did spy on the surface world, it never contacted it. Most likely, Aegir had gone through some great changes to enter into the greater politics of TERRA. Ulpianus had told Gladia not to go to Aegir, but it's not like they had any other choice. The Abyssal Hunters had nothing to do, and returning to Aegir was their only real goal. And it's not like Ulpianus was seen the last 3 months either. He was completely AWOL. And of course, aside from Rhodes Island and the Abyssal Hunters, there was also the Inquisition of Iberia, which needed to visit Aegir as well. As Carmen, one of the High Inquisitors of the Inquisition, was talking to Irene about old people things, Jordi shows up to tell them about the signals he's getting from the sky. A school of things in the sky. Aegir drones. The drones weren't threatening, they were simply there to start a conversation. And from a projection, Clementia starts speaking to the Iberian Inquisitors, the first political contact between the land and the sea. Aegir connects the cities through waterways, and now it wants to create waterways all across Terra's shores, starting with Iberia, which can be problematic. The Aegir are arrogant, but not mean-spirited. They are very logical, too logical. Being that Aegir was a country that had always kept to itself, it is rather immature when it comes to geopolitics. To them, everything makes sense. There are threats all over TERRA, and TERRA needs to be united, all under Aegir, not for conquest or anything, simply for the sake of logic. They don't understand the differences in culture because they have always had one culture their entire lives. Okay, Think of it like this. You have a nation that hates outsiders and a country that has always fallen under the control of stronger empires. The outsider-hating nation, due to its culture and history, has a very low chance of making friends with a society of people that have built resentment throughout generations due to powerful conquerors. There are trust issues. They wouldn't want to make an alliance, and then you have a kingdom that worships a god that tells them that they are special and only they go to heaven. Now, how would you unite all these three cultures into one banner? And that is just 3 nations. What if there were more? 4, 5, 8, 10? All with their own histories and backgrounds. These other nations have always had contact with each other, so they know their limits. Aegir has always kept to itself. To Aegir, not only has it always been the main character, but also the only character. It can't fathom that sort of friction. In short, Aegir was a closed nation that is now trying to be globalists. So, when Aegir is building waterways to Iberia with military behind it, Carmen was skeptical to say the least. He knew that Aegir wasn't planning anything dangerous, but this geopolitical ignorance came with unease. After telling them that Aegir will send some units to accept landborne visitors, Clementian's drones shut off their projections, staying in the sky to provide any necessary information. Carmen tells Irene to gather everyone while the nervous Jordi asks him if he can go to Meliarium. In the 3 months since Jordi had joined the Inquisition, he hadn't done a lot. Carmen lets him go, not to reward him, but because Carmen believes in Jordi. Carmen could see it. Jordi was weighed down by frustrations, by helplessness, but he also saw potential in the madman in front of him. I made a whole video about this man, so if you want some context about this, go watch that video. But, in essence, Ulpianus had told Jordi that Jordi was a descendant of Breogan, which gave Jordi, who is one of the Aegir refugees living on land, something to chase in his quest for self-actualization. So, if Jordi wanted to know more about Breogan, his best lead was Aegir, which is why he wanted to go there. In the sea itself was Ulpianus, quietly wandering about in his seaborn nest. One thing about the Abyssal Hunters is that the Seaborn consider the Abyssal Hunters to be kin. Because they have Seaborn genes, to the Seaborn, all the Abyssal Hunters have to do is embrace their Seaborn DNA and join the V-Many. So, most of the time, the Seaborn aren't hostile against the Abyssal Hunters, which is a great advantage. Why was Ulpianus in the Seaborn nest? Espionage, sort of. The Seaborn would not reveal everything to him, not as long as he wasn't fully Seaborn. Even so, they would reveal crumbs of information due to his Abyssal Hunter genes. And all that Ulpianus could gather from them was that the Seaborn have some connection to the affairs of Meliarium. He couldn't tell what, he couldn't be fully certain about anything, but something was fishy, for sure. Chapter 2. After an unspecified amount of time, everyone that needed to got into Meliarium. Jordi, Irene, Doctor, Kelchi, and the Abyssal Hunters minus Ulpianus. Being that Aegir is underwater, everything works differently here. The city is always moving, gravity fluctuates every now and then, and there are little handies everywhere. It was overwhelming for someone like Jordi, who was born and raised in the little town of Grand Faro. Still, things weren't completely unfamiliar to him. Now would be as good a time as any to actually talk about Breogan. He is tragic, tragically uncharismatic. He died around 50 years ago, but before that, he was an Aegir scientist that had suffered due to Seaborn attacks. He knew that Aegir could not defeat the Seaborn alone. So, he traveled to Meliarium and started working there for a while, and for the payment of his work, he wanted to have a meeting with the Council of Meliarium from that time. He wanted to open up a waterway between Aegir and the surface. Then, he was promptly and aggressively rejected, which caused them to migrate to the surface. He became a scientist of Iberia and revolutionized its technology, building the greatest naval fleet in all of TERRA. He made Iberia's lighthouses, its ships, and the Stultifera navis. He was an explorer and an inventor, a genius of his time. At some point though, his paranoia came back, so he decided to ask the royalty of Iberia for permission to start working on ways to combat the seaborne threat, which they agreed. That's when he made the Stultifera navis and its fleet. The fleet was meant for research first and foremost, but the Iberian royalty decided to use them as warships instead. So, Breogan, which was pissed, gave some of his notes to Jordi's parents for safekeeping, and the rest of his notes he hid in the Stultifera navis. From there, the Profound Silence happened, which was the worst disaster of Iberia. Basically, it was a large-scale seaborne invasion. All of Iberia's lighthouses were turned into nests, and Iberia never really managed to recover and went on a downward spiral, until the Stultifera navis event, that is. Because of the Profound Silence, the masses decided to kill Breogan because he was easy to blame. It wasn't logical, but oh well. And that's the story of the Great Breogan, the Rizlis, who no one took seriously. Jordi wants to find out more about Breogan's time in Aegir to find out more about himself. Still, the cultural shock was pretty immense for him. Irene, who was beside him, was also rather uneasy. Due to the Profound Silence, the Inquisition killed a lot of Aegirs, because of their potential links to the Church of the Deep. In their defense, most of the Aegir who had fled to land were cultists of the Deep, but some weren't. So, Irene, representing the Inquisition, knew that she had to do her best to connect with the Aegir. Thankfully though, she had no reason to worry. A man by the name of Avitus interrupted their conversation and told her that Aegir doesn't blame Iberia for the things that they have done. It was to maintain a sense of peace and control. The Inquisition held no blame. Before they could talk more, they were informed that the area they were in was under investigation, and everyone was advised to leave. A worker was missing, so they had to search everything. Irene decided to stay in order to meet up with the Sea Patrol, which is the Aegir police, while Avitus dragged Jordi away to continue talking to him. Damn, I really should speed up, shouldn't I? Chapter 3. Technology in Aegir had advanced far greater than the Abyssal Hunters could have expected, at least when it comes to Skadi. While the tech here was built from the Doctor's old civilization, he too couldn't really wrap his head around most of the things due to his amnesia. Still, there was one thing that Skadi and Laurentina could show the Doctor: the beacon launcher. 300 years ago, Aegir had mastered the ocean. It had reached the zenith. And by 200 years ago, it was ready to break the barrier encasing TERRA in order to explore space. These beacon launcher towers were at first made for that purpose, until the Seaborne came. Now they're used to mark the waterways. Not as exciting, but still useful. Meanwhile, the missing Abyssal Hunter got called to meet up with Clementia. Clementia is warm. She's far more kind than the average Aegir, far more compassionate, so much so that she hugged Gladia as soon as she saw her, something that Gladia's own mother would never do. After talking about a whole lot of nothing, Gladia asked the question playing in her mind for years. The Abyssal Hunters program failed. What is Aegir doing now? More specifically, what exactly is the Waterway program, and how does it work, and what is it meant to lead to? Which Clementia answers, in a way. In the last 5 years, the Aegir had started working on different kinds of weaponry, starting with Class 1 weapons. After 11 months, those weapons were useless. The Seaborne had learned to adapt to them. Same thing happened with Class 2 and 3 weapons within shorter time intervals. And now, the Seaborne genes have caught up to the Aegir's ability to innovate. Still, not all was lost. Those weapons bought time, enough time for scientists to come up with Class 4 weapons. These are far more biological, aimed to separate adult Seaborns from their nests in order to concretely eradicate those nests. The only way to wipe out the Seaborn is to wipe them all out at once. Still, Gladia's report concerning the multiple Leviathans does make things more complicated. Not only because of the information itself, but also the messenger. The Abyssal Hunters had spent an extended period of time in the First Moon's lair. For all that anyone knows, they could be Seaborn disguising themselves as Aegir, especially Ulpianus, which has not only not returned to Aegir, but also spent the most time in the Firstborn's lair, which is why the Abyssal Hunters have to be welcomed back with the Tribunal. Back with Irene, she gets to meet up with the Sea Patrol, led by Secunda. At first, Secunda tells Irene to leave the vicinity before ignoring her, but after some very light persuasion, Secunda lets Irene help out with the Sea Patrol's investigations. Now, a decent chunk of the story, maybe like 10-15%, is this investigation, but I'm mostly going to gloss over it. It's not truly all that important, the specifics, and while I like both Irene and Secunda in my videos, I mostly go over world building and philosophy, not murder mysteries. So while there is nothing particularly wrong with the subplot, I just don't feel like covering it. The script for this video has 4,300 words as of now, and looking down right now, the whole script is 18,000 words, 18,600. I have to trim some things out. Chapter 4. Irene and Secunda start going through the missing person's home, find some clues, and decide to start questioning some of the people that knew her. Cool. Now, going back to Irene's boyfriend, Martus took Jordi to the Sophontheatrum, which I will just call the Theatrum. In it, there is a giant metallic coral, and this giant metallic coral can apparently answer all of Jordi's questions about everything he wants to know. Let's just call it the Theatrum Terminal. This terminal is the culmination of everything that the Aegir know and don't know, their knowledge and culture. It was conceived by possibly the greatest mind of Aegir, Martus. Martus was a researcher of the prehistoric civilization. Most cities of Aegir have their own unique structures and designs. Even so, nearly all of them have their own theatrums. Theatrum was created as a place where people think, debate, and doubt, eventually leading to a conclusion. Most of Aegir's current culture was found in the theatrums, from their most complex equations to their most inspiring of songs. Something I've glossed over is Aegir's love for art, but it's not really important anyway. Think of Aegir as Atlantis. Everything makes sense that way. Jordi was intrigued by this Martus person, so Martus continued. Martus was alive around 200 years ago. Even so, people now still know of how eccentric he was. He was unmatched when it came to deductive and theatrical reasoning. Even so, he was always hesitant to draw a conclusion, even when the conclusion was clear. He would not budge until he debated all these questions with himself, and only then would he draw a conclusion, a certainty. The proverb that he resonated with the most was, "There is no justice here, only the path ahead." For the sake of Aegir, for the sake of the world itself, he would always move forward. Questions were his motivation, the future itself was his aspiration. Sadly, the talk between Martus and Jordi got interrupted by the Abyssal Hunter Tribunal. At least Jordi could see for himself how the Theatrum was used. Only Gladia had to be on stage, and Kelshi leaves after a while, so Scotty, Laurentina, and the Doctor make fun of Kelshi to pass the time. That is until the Theatrum starts getting full, so the Doctor moves away to sit somewhere else because he doesn't like attention, and the Abyssal Hunters only bring attention. Soon, the Tribunal was started. What the Doctor wasn't expecting, though, was for someone to secretly threaten him with death as soon as he sat down, clearly having an objective in mind for the Doctor. Which is when the great glorious last night comes in, ends the Tribunal, and kills everyone. That's the end. It's so good. I love him. I'm just kidding. That doesn't happen, sadly. Chapter 5. The Aegir do not resent the Abyssal Hunters. Not at all. They simply want answers. They hold no contempt, only questions. The Tribunal isn't a test, but a meeting. This Tribunal is long, but the story itself only gives us the important parts. One Aegir asked the question on everybody's mind. The Abyssal Hunters had spent quite a bit of time in the Firstborn's lair. Not only that, in the last 5 years, they have had no checkups. Soon, the class for weapons will be unleashed, and a great war on the Seaborn will start. The question is, with how mutated the Abyssal Hunters have become, can they be trusted to fight for Aegir? Or will they become a great enemy? You see, the Abyssal Hunters pose an immense risk, possibly more than the Seaborn. They were made in despicable ways and are now feared and pitied by their creators. At least that is what Ulpianus tells the Doctor, ready to smash him to a pulp if the Doctor brings any suspicion into his general direction. The Doctor wasn't an Inquisitor, Abyssal Hunter, and wasn't a Kelshi either. He was only brought here by Kelshi, but his identity was a secret. None of that mattered to Ulpianus. What did matter, however, was that the Doctor could help the Hunters. Ulpianus trusts the Hunters, but he also knows them well. Scotty's stupid, Laurentina's crazy, which means that the one making all the decisions is Gladia. He already told her to be careful, to not return to Aegir, yet she still did. This has put her into the spotlight. Now, it's not game over. As long as the Abyssal Hunters keep this Tribunal as a meeting, everything will be fine. Still, it's a big gamble, especially due to Ulpianus' suspicions regarding the inner workings of Aegir. Even after this Tribunal, they could still be in danger. What the Doctor has to do is simple. Because the other living Abyssal Hunters weren't part of the team that actually engineered the Abyssal Hunters' genes, they won't be able to clearly explain the changes in their bodies. Ulpianus will pass some info onto the Doctor, and the Doctor has to relay all of that to Gladia at some point. His secret conversation with the Doctor gets sidetracked as another Aegir speaks of in the Tribunal. Blandus, a fellow researcher of the Abyssal Hunters program. He was a friend of Ulpianus, and after him, held the most power when it came to the Abyssal Hunters program. Being that, as far as the Aegir know, Ulpianus is AWOL, Blandus is the leading authority to everything regarding the Abyssal Hunters, and he could say for certain, Scotty, Gladia, and Laurentina will not become Seaborn. A lot of sci-fi mumbo-jumbo here, so just bear with me. All Abyssal Hunters have an auto-adaptive junction, basically a device that keeps Seaborn genes in check, adapting to the gene's adaptations. It should be regularly maintained. Even so, the changes that the Abyssal Hunters have gone through are well within acceptable ranges. The only time that the auto-adaptive junction failed was with Ulpianus, but when it comes to present Abyssal Hunters, their junctions should still work well enough. Which brings up the question of Ulpianus. Now, the Aegir were well past Gladia and her squad. Their main focus was Ulpianus, even if none of them knew that he was present, talking to the Doctor. The Doctor asks Ulpianus about his motivations. The thing is, everything that Ulpianus has dug up about the Seaborn suggests that the rest of the Leviathans are awakening. He doesn't know when, but the time is close. Because of that, the Seaborn have been migrating towards the surface world for more nutrition, and this migration perfectly coincides with Aegir's waterway program to the surface. What is going on within Milarium? He cannot know, but he must know. Thing is, because that multiple Leviathans theory came from Ulpianus, the Aegir cannot help but doubt it. Seaborn activities were supposed to be slowed down after the death of the Firstborn, so there being multiple Leviathans makes sense. It's convenient. Clementia asks Blandus if he has anything to add regarding Ulpianus, but he refuses. He knows that there is no way to clear his name of suspicion, and anything he adds and will say will simply make Ulpianus appear more suspicious. Suddenly, Blandus looks in the Doctor's direction, but Ulpianus was already gone, so in the end, Gladia and her squad were cleared of any possible guilt, but in turn, now the entirety of Milarium views Ulpianus as a likely traitor. Chapter 6, we get a flashback of Tulia, the missing worker. From there, Secundo and Irene interrogate a woman by the name of Lucilla and a woman called Cassia. Tulia went missing 30 hours ago, which coincides with when Milarium docked to greet its visitors. And so, the investigation continues. Something I have mentioned a few times by now is that the sky in Arknights is fake. What I haven't mentioned is that it was fake. In Colombia, a scientist by the name of Christian Wright smashed through the barrier containing TERRA, splitting the sky open. That happened a year ago. There is a lot to that story, and there's a whole event by the name of Long Trail going through everything that led up to it, but none of that is important to Path of Life. All that is important is that the sky is actually a sky now. Clementia knew of this, but didn't know the specifics, which Kelsey told her about. Clearly, there's still a lot that Aegir needs to know about. The Aegir are inheritors of the old civilization. They bear responsibility for humanity itself. They need to uncover every last secret of the land and the sea and even the sky, for TERRA's sake. Kelsey quite liked Clementia. She's kind, patient, and most of all, has the same arrogance as all Aegir. She's a right fit for the Council of Milarium. Still, Kelsey had to ask the same question that Claudia had asked Clementia. What is the endgame for the waterway program? It's simple really, I have already mentioned it. There are too many phenomena on TERRA that are unnatural, from the seaborne to originium to a lot of tech scattered across the land. And most likely, they are all related. To solve the seaborne problem, they need to understand TERRA itself. That is the endgame. But for now, all that matters is making a connection between Iberia and Aegir. In another place, Ulpianus found the Doctor alone again. As I've already said, the war between Aegir and the Seaborn has been going on for 2 centuries. And yet, it is now that they both simultaneously have decided to approach land, the sudden migration, and the change of an entire nation. They both must come from the same cause. But it's not time for Claudia to know, and it is certainly not the Doctor's place to know. For now, what matters is the waterway program, clearing the way to buy enough time for the main forces of Aegir to show up. Aegir have always had simple and effective plans. Even so, here in Milarium, there are problems, mainly the Church of the Deep and the missing worker. Right when the waterway program is reaching its critical stages, something is going on behind the scenes, and Ulpianus must know what. The Doctor suggests that Ulpianus should join Rhodes Island. After all, with Rhodes Island's help, spying on the city should be much easier. To which Ulpianus surprisingly agrees with. He only tells the Doctor to keep an eye on Scotty before leaving. Which leads us to the Abyssal Hunters. As they were yapping about whatever girl bosses talk about, an alarm went off. 2 Aegir squadrons were sent to deploy a beacon into Nest 37, which is the seaborne nest right between Aegir and Iberia. The squads were ambushed and needed help, and so Laurentina and Claudia leave to go to fight, leaving Scotty to look after the Doctor. Same goes with Irene and Secunda, all preparing to rescue their stranded comrades. Which is exactly when the last knight comes in, saves all the Aegir, and then he kills them all as well, and it kills the Seaborn. I didn't see. No, it's not. No, come on, why not? Why not? Chapter 7. The Death of Life is a book made from old civilization records. It's about a man slowly losing everything and his entire world falling to an unknowable alien threat. Some entity or entities that destroyed the old civilization. From his lover to his friends. It's a story of detachment, pessimism, and death. It has gotten incredibly popular lately amongst the Aegir, and the author of that book just so happens to be Avitus. After the Tribunal, Jordi stayed in the Theatrum asking the Terminal all sorts of questions for an entire day before Avitus caught sight of him again. How big is the ocean? Is it bigger than the land? How much bigger? And many, many more. It's exciting. All this knowledge that doesn't exist anywhere else on TERRA, with such detail. Even so, after researching Breogan's records, it's clear that Jordi is not related to him. He still doesn't feel like he belongs in Aegir. Even so, he is an Aegir. Avitus reassures him that heritage is not important. Yes, Jordi might not have any connections to Milarium or even Aegir, but one can be found anywhere. from a plot to an object. If he wants to, a connection will be made in some way. Everyone searches for answers from the past. Jordi is no different. Avitus bears a lot of knowledge from prehistory. He knows about patterns. History paves the future, but if that's true, what about the fate of the Aegir? Thankfully, Jordi doesn't hear that last part. The doctor meets up with Scotty and they start speaking, heart to heart. Scotty knows about Isharmala and how he resides in her body. She's a Leviathan. Worst case scenario, she could bring danger to all of TERRA. But the doctor knows that won't happen. He believes in her. Just like Ulpianus. The two had a close student-mentor type relationship. For the longest time, she thought that he had died. But now he is back. She doesn't really know what to do. To which the doctor basically tells her to not worry about it. Scotty is the type of person to make decisions in the moment, not to plan for the future. Basically, he's calling her stupid. Meanwhile, the Aegir military went to rescue the squads that were dispatched, but out of the thousands of soldiers, only 26 remained. 26 scouts. Everyone else had died. It's sad, but better than nothing. Somehow, the military got outplayed by the Seaborn. It is what it is. If only the blast was there. Chapter 8. It was clear that the Seaborn were forewarned about the battalions sent after Nest 37, but Nest 37 cannot be abandoned. It is crucial to get rid of that nest for the waterway program to actually work, otherwise there is no point. So, Miliaria has no choice but to go on a full frontal assault. So, Clementia had no choice but to gather every last available force on Miliarium, which included the Abyssal Hunters. At this point though, the Abyssal Hunters are not exactly Aegir, and I'm talking about the faction, not race. For the last 5 years pretty much, the Hunters have been working for Rhodes Island. Because of that, Kelshi did not want to put the Hunters in any unnecessary risks. Even so, this was something that Gladia wanted to do. She wanted to fight for Aegir, so Kelshi didn't try to stop her. Clementia, while really warm and kind, is still pragmatic, as all Aegir are. She feels guilty, remorse, regret. But she also knows that the Abyssal Hunters are needed to take out Nest 37. Even if the Hunters haven't had the chance to take in their homeland ever since their return. The last thing she could do for them was have them get examined by Blandus. In the city itself, Irene and Jordi finally meet back up. Jordi is as lost as ever, confiding in his worries with literally every breathing thing in his 10-meter proximity. Irene, though, actually knows how to lay most of his worries to rest. Because, in a way, she could relate to him. She had her hometown destroyed by a catastrophe, basically a natural disaster, and a scripture is all she has left of it. Because of that scripture, she became an Inquisitor. But after learning about some of the Inquisition's less than pleasant history, she was confused. Even so, it was only after learning about everything that she was truly able to understand her faith. Just as that scripture connected Irene to the Inquisition, Jordi will be able to find something similar, whether it's an object or an objective. And of course, if you have watched my Lumen video, you would know that Jordi is capable. If he keeps looking, he will find the connections he seeks. Leaving those two behind, Secunda gets approached by Lucilla, because Lucilla decided to admit a few things. Oh, and also Tulia is dead. I forgot to mention that. Killed by last night. No, she wasn't. Chapter 9. After 5 years, finally, the Hunters were getting examined again by an Aegir researcher. All he had to do was put them into sleep, and the machines themselves would automatically fix whatever issues they had. He himself would only be updating their auto-adaptive junctions. The surgery was fully automated. After some talking, Blandus put the Hunters into sleep and began working on their adaptive junctions. However, a few minutes after the operation started, a woman and "Fish mcgee! What are you doing here?" Then again, he is a lower... What's the worst that could... Oh, they're threatening Blandus. "What the hell, Fish mcgee?" These two people were cultists of the deep. They put a euthanasia needle near his throat so that he wouldn't make any sudden moves. Even so, shouted at them to not touch the unconscious Abyssal Hunters. Blandus was someone that didn't like the Abyssal Hunters project. After all, it was pretty unethical, even if most of it was voluntary work. Most of the people that volunteered couldn't adapt to the Abyssal Hunters' genes and got turned into seaborn to be slaughtered by Ulpianus himself. The ones that did become weapons, they all became sacrificial pawns in order to fight against the seaborn. They lost their autonomy. So, in that case, why did someone like Blandus choose to put so much work into the Abyssal Hunters project? The reason was simple. He had to oversee the program for himself. He couldn't stop the experiments, but he could supervise them to make sure that nothing goes wrong. In essence, someone like that should not want to see Abyssal Hunters going to battle again, especially into a nest as dangerous as Nest 37. The cultists told him to stop the operations, but Blandus couldn't do that because the operations weren't manual. Just as Fish McGee tried to destroy the computers, he got stabbed by none other than the last of Gladia. It wasn't just her, all the Abyssal Hunters were awake. Thing is, Blandus actually did mess with the machines, intentionally. If the surgery didn't work well and didn't change the state of the Hunters, they could be persuaded to not fight. Because of that, the Hunters woke up quickly and apprehended the cultists. Take that, Fish McGee! Once a loser, always a loser. But whether the operations would put the Hunters in peak condition or not didn't matter. They would fight anyway. And so, what Blandus had to do didn't change. He had to find a way for the Hunters to go back into their old lives, to not live as biological weapons of Aegir. That is not why science is respected. Science needs to bring unity, not sacrifices. He let the Abyssal Hunters program finish, and now he had to make sure that there is no need for it. That way, Scotty could continue working on lighting arrays, Laurentino could go back to sculpting, and Gladia could go back to yoo-hoo-hooing. Thankfully, because the cultists showed up and threatened Blandus, Blandus was clear of any seaborn suspicions. Even so, they still forced him to do his work and heal them up. If the cultists are trying to do everything in their power to stop the waterway program, then it must be effective. Once they mark Nest 37, they can deploy their Class 4 weapons and destroy every nest in the vicinity. Going back to the investigation subplot, Secunda called Irene back. They, well, investigated a bit more before parting, leaving Secunda alone. Just as she was about to leave as well, she stops in place. In front of her was her teacher, Ulpianus. Ulpianus was kind of sick of this investigation and decided to just tell her that she got duped. She was asking the wrong questions and got misled by Cassia. There are no worthless answers, their worth lies in the questions. It's easy to mislead someone by asking them pointed questions, and all of Secunda's questions were pointed. Due to Secunda's wrong questions, she started investigating Tullia's past, even though that wasn't important. Tullia saw something that she shouldn't have. That's it. It's why Ulpianus puts so much importance in the questions people ask him and stays silent when they ask him a wrong question. Remember how I said that someone once managed to ask Ulpianus 10 questions in a row? That was Secunda, but it seems that she has been slacking lately. Still, Ulpianus was under great suspicion. Secunda had all the right to attack him right now. But that wouldn't help her. As Ulpianus tells her, the one-way program is filled with holes. Someone that learned a little too much got killed. By whom? Cassia, one of the girls that Secunda interrogated. If such an open project has secrets, it's untrustworthy. Ulpianus doesn't care about Secunda's doubts. All he cares about is Aegir, and with that, he leaves her before more people discover him. After that, Secunda goes and catches up with Irene, finding an assimilated Tullia. They had seen the remains of her in the ocean when they went to rescue the soldiers attacked around Nest 37. But here she was, not as an Aegir, but a seaborn, still not fully assimilated, but clearly only days away. So, before she becomes volatile, Secunda herself puts her to rest, ending the investigation. Chapter 10. Jordi sees Avitus fixing a little handy and starts talking to him again, but Avitus stops him from asking questions again and starts talking about his past. He had told Jordi that blood relations aren't important, but that was only a half-truth. To Avitus, nothing can change that if you want to connect yourself to an identity. Blood relations are an excellent lead to follow. When one is lost, we seek a way out, a different reality. But that's the wrong way of going about it. There's only one reality, you will never find another. If you keep looking, you end up the same as Avitus. So, Jordi asks him who it is that he lost, to which Avitus tells him about his lover, someone who shared his ideals, someone who enriched his spirit, made him whole. Avitus always liked deciphering old relics. That's how he came to write The Death of Life, and before that, how he came to meet her. The Aegir have lived through many hardships, mostly due to the Seaborn, an ever-present threat that refuses to die, a disaster that has taken many Aegir lives with no end in sight. Even so, the Aegir continue to persist. Fight, live, persist. Lava bridges made from volcanoes to generate energy, aquatic tubs that transform currents, and artificial suns that light up the ocean. The Aegir have managed to survive thanks to the minds of their predecessors, the ancient civilization. Truly, the life of an Aegir is too short, only 150 years. Ouch. The more dangerous the era, the more valuable the creations. And when his wife had plans of raising a child, pregnant Aegir transferred their embryos to incubators and most sent their children away to be raised in nurseries by people efficient in raising children. Avitus and his love had planned to keep their child and raise it themselves. But before their child could be born, she died. In The Death of Life, the protagonist has no choice but to watch as everything around him dies, as everything becomes nothing, with no choice but to embrace his own end. Jordi argues that such a future is too far away, but Avitus doesn't agree. The old civilization was much greater than Aegir. Aegir is simply borrowing their vestiges, especially with a threat as grand as the Seaborn. Could the ocean keep even one drop of water clean in 150 years? The reality of the fact is that the Seaborn are adapting faster than the Aegir can innovate. What happens once the Seaborn adapt to the Class 4 weapons? How about when they adapt to the most likely upcoming Class 5 weapons? Where does that leave the Aegir? The Seaborn have been so efficient in assimilating every species into their hive mind that they can't evolve using the genes of other species anymore. They are evolving in erratic, unconventional means, creating organs with unknowable functions. Once upon a time, the goal of the Aegir was to claim the stars. Now, it's simply to survive. With such pessimism, it can only be a matter of time until his wife was overcome with despair and gave up on raising their child together. Soon after, the Abyssal Hunters raided the First One's lair and none came back. That was 5 years ago, if you recall. Soon after, his wife got sick and died in depression. Their son was safely born, but he sent him away anyway, having no passion to raise a child. And of course, 4 years later, he wrote The Death of Life. There is a reason why that book has been so sensational, because despite its otherworldly nature, many Aegir still relate to it. So, yeah. Take that, Jordi. Don't talk to everyone about your problems again if you don't want to drop bombs on you. Avitus has no connections left to reality, he's simply existing. But Jordi doesn't have to live that way. Thankfully, Jordi has given up on chasing blood relations. He's still looking for scattered Boujon notes, but not because of possible blood relations, but because he wants to. Jordi is a talented engineer. After all, inventing is his passion. I'm telling you, Artificer Lumen is a real possibility. Still, Chapter 10. Gee golly, we gotta speed this up. Secunda meets up with Blandus to check up on him. At one point, Secunda wanted to be an Abyssal Hunter but was rejected despite doing very well. The one who rejected her was Ulpianus, so she bears a bit of a grudge. Immediately she starts asking him about Ulpianus, but Blandus knows that Secunda has better things to investigate, so he tells her that he was the one who rejected her application. Ulpianus concurred, but Blandus was the one to do it. Secunda was incredibly talented. She should have been accepted instantly. But she wasn't. Because the Abyssal Hunters program wasn't certain. Even if voluntary, it's exploitative. Ulpianus led the research because he was a man who could abandon his ideals and emotions all for the benefit of Aegir. Perhaps he will save Aegir someday, but that would only be through self-sacrifice. While Ulpianus is exactly what Aegir needs, he is also its greatest foe. There cannot be a second Ulpianus. No one should become another Ulpianus. Only one person can bear that responsibility. Having more puts Aegir into disarray. Now, personally, I would say that this could be considered selfish on Ulpianus' part, and as Secunda puts it, they really had no right to decide that for her. But they did, and it's over now. Either way, Secunda has a job to do, and that is to interrogate Fish mcgee, that bastard. Just as she leaves, Blandus is approached by another character, the Doctor. You see, a while back, maybe like a few hours, Ulpianus shared some info with the Doctor. After looking around and gathering data, it was clear that the Watery program was sabotaged. The data interactions between the beacons in the city and the beacons deployed into the seaborne nests are unusual. He has checked the signals everywhere and only the old Abyssal Hunter's lab was left. He needed the data from there to confirm his suspicions, so the Doctor and Ulpianus decided to work together. Ulpianus could go past every unimportant person. The only one he couldn't stealth past was Blandus. So the Doctor had to keep him busy, which leads us to now. Blandus keeps telling him to leave, but he doesn't, so Blandus just lets the Doctor hang around and maybe help out a little. So, the Doctor, which in the back of his mind knows about old civilization technology, starts messing around with the cameras to help Ulpianus. The Doctor doesn't remember how to use the tech, he just knows. Amnesia, anyway. And after Ulpianus gets what he needs, the Doctor stops messing around. The Abyssal Hunters were going to wake up soon as well. In the meantime, Blandus asks the Doctor about Oripathy. It's this whole thing. Let's go through it quick. Basically, on TERRA, there's this substance called originium. It's only in the surface world and not in the ocean. It's the main power source of TERRA. Cool? Cool. It also gives people rock cancer. Not cool. The people who get infected by it are called the infected and usually suffer for the rest of their lives. It also has no cure and is suspiciously similar to the seaborne. Anyway, Oripathy, which is rock cancer, robs people of their fates. But in Aegir, no such thing really exists. They don't suffer from oripathy, nor from any other disease. Every disease has a cure in Aegir. Everyone does whatever they want. No one suffers from fate. Yet, the hunters are shaped by their fate. They have one sole purpose, and that is their entire lives. That's why they were made. They're in a dead end. Someone has to help them. Someone has to make them human again, at least socially, no matter what. After that, Blandus leaves and gets killed by the last knight and his glorious shaft. And oh my god, why is he not here? Chapter 11. Secunda interrogates Fish mcgee. Piece of crap mcgee. Thing is, Fish mcgee doesn't consider himself a cultist. He just agrees with what Cassia believes, which is that nothing matters. Aegir needs a tragedy to wake up. Otherwise, the death of life is a certainty. What is certain for sure is that the Abyssal Hunters will raid Nest 37. They start getting ready and talking about, I don't know, mundane things like Scotty telling Gladia and Laurentina to kill her if the Sharmla takes over and that she will kill them if they become Seaborn. Business as usual. Which leads us to Ulpianus and the Doctor again. Again, the data interactions between the Nest and the city are unusual. The bulk of the work was handled in the old Abyssal Hunter's lab, which Ulpianus just infiltrated. While he doesn't fully understand how Class 4 weapons and the beacons placed on the nest except 37 work, it's clear that the coordination between the weapons and the beacons have been altered. Basically, the Class 4 weapons won't be destroying any nests, but sending information to the nest instead. Something like that. It's complicated. Still, one question remains. Where did the skepticism come from? Why is Ulpianus so suspicious of Aegir? What exactly did he see when he was in the Firstborn's lair? Finally, we get here. Ulpianus was meant to deal the finishing blow to the Charmla but was distracted. The sanctuary of sorts I have already mentioned. What he saw were things that shouldn't have been there. Old Aegir technology. Tech from hundreds of years ago. More precisely, 200 years. But the whole point of the Abyssal Hunters project was that no Aegir had ever entered the Firstborn's nest before. No such records exist. Not in papers, not in the Theatrum terminal. Which means that before the Aegir were even aware of it, they had made contact with the Leviathan. Now, something must be done. The project has to be halted. The Abyssal Hunters have left to go to Nest 37. There is no time. Ulpianus himself will go do his work. As for the doctor, he can visit Clementia. Chapter 12. The Hunters have reached the nest and are fighting. Meanwhile, Jordi has been studying the beacon launcher with the help of a technician. It was probably made by Breogan, same as everything in life, other than race, I guess. Jesus. Just as they're talking and having a good time though, Ulpianus shows up and knocks the technician out. After that, he runs off, with Jordi chasing after him. Finally, we have the doctor and Clementia. Clementia was rather interested in the doctor. After all, someone like Kelshi isn't one to keep an advisor, which means that the doctor must be important in some way for her to bring him along. Because of that, she was prepared to listen to him. First, he tells her that she sent Rhodes Island's hunters on a dangerous mission. Why is everyone treating the hunters like children? Anyway, that's not important. What is important is that the doctor tells her that the beacons have been tampered with. Immediately, Clementia starts telling the little handies to look into things, and also to notify all Fleet Legion commanders to leave enough troops to assist the hunters while slowly pulling back. Rhodes Island has been of great help to Aegir so far. They probably deserve better. So, Kelshi, which was apparently there as well, asked Clementia how she could be so sure that the hunters won't assimilate when inside such an infested nest. Technically, all she has is Blandus' statement that they won't assimilate. Clementia can't help but be honest. Blandus' statement and Tribunal didn't help ease her worries much. She still trusts him, because he is the only lead researcher of the Abyssal Hunters program on Miliarium, but the hunters have been screwing about on land with the Abyssal Hunters genes for 5 years now. For them not to be in critical conditions is rather unbelievable. Thing is, Aegir never truly gave up on the Abyssal Hunters project. It has publicly, but behind closed doors, it's still a topic of discussion. Even so, after years and years, Aegir still only has 4 Abyssal Hunters left. They have not been able to replicate the minor success that the project originally had. Hell, they don't even know why Claudia's group is sane. The program was always messy, it was uncertain. It only worked somewhat through pure chance. So, the hunters weigh heavily on Clementia's mind. Kelshi tells her that Claudia never believed in the feasibility of the waterway program, which is why she has tried to be in the center of it, to make sure that it succeeds. The waterway program seems to be the best way forward for Aegir, but internally, most people doubt it. There is some kind of ideological understanding that all Aegir share, which gives Clementia some kind of revelation. In every theatrum, there is a proverb written that goes, "There is no justice here, only the path ahead." A favorite of Martus, possibly the greatest Aegir researcher. After his time, many criticized him for always comparing work against work. for being overly concerned with what answer leads to the most gain for Aegir kind. But for Martus, things like justice never mattered. All he cared about was the path forward, the path of life. Justice was debated on and cherished by the masses. Martus had other things to think about. Most likely, without knowing, most Aegir have adopted his philosophy, but at the end of the day, that was still the ideology that worked best for Martus. Aegir aren't emotionless. They simply drown out their emotional side with rationality. So, even if most appear calm, in reality, they just have an air of stoicism. Their feelings are no different from any other species on TERRA. Unlike the great glorious last night, ready to kill everyone. They kill the first one, kill the second one, kill the third one. No, he's not here. Where is he? Chapter 13. Blandus and Ulpianus were once best friends. They were the two main researchers behind the Abyssal Hunters project, and did most of their work together. Despite being a complete loner, Ulpianus put a lot of trust into Blandus, and despite being an idealist, Blandus put a lot of faith into Ulpianus. The two could not have been more different. The only thing that they had in common was that they were both scientists. Even so, the two of them managed to lead the Abyssal Hunters project into a semi-success, from making the genes to the autoadaptive junction. But as you remember, in the Tribunal, I mentioned that Ulpianus' autoadaptive junction was defective. There is more to that story. Before the Abyssal Hunters project was open to the public, all the experiments were done on Ulpianus himself. It's why he wears a mask over his mouth. It's not for grip reasons. A little. It's because the experiments screwed with his body. And of course, Blandus hated that, but there was no way he could stop him. All Blandus could do was build up resentment over the whole situation. Going back to the autoadaptive junction, whether it's because the experiments on Ulpianus were beta tests or something else, the Abyssal Hunter's genes and the autoadaptive junction he has work differently. After one particular analysis, Blandus found something utterly diabolical happening within Ulpianus' body. The way the junctions work is that when the seaborn genes in the Abyssal Hunter's genes start acting up and acting aggressive, the junction counters its aggression with aggression. With Ulpianus, however, the stronger the seaborn genes got, the weaker the junction reacted. Now, that would mean that Ulpianus was getting assimilated faster, right? No, quite the opposite. Just as Blandus was about to stop the surgery on Ulpianus, the seaborn genes stopped taking over Ulpianus' body, as if Ulpianus' body and the seaborn genes reached some kind of understanding and stopped fighting each other. Why? They couldn't tell. They had no time either. This was before the raid on the Firstborn's nest, so they had no time to look into it. Talking about the Firstborn's raid, Blandus didn't believe that the raid would stop the Seaborn. He never had faith in the Abyssal Hunters program. The only reason why he didn't veto the program was because of Ulpianus. But by this point, he was in sunk cost fallacy. He couldn't stop the Hunters' operations, so he had no choice but to send them all to war, even his own best friend. His best friend that shouldered all the responsibility, the one that killed all the failures who turned into the Seaborn. Blandus saw failed hunters as sacrifices, but Ulpianus didn't think the same. A homeland ravaged with the Seaborn would only yield more corpses. What has to be done, has to be done. Which leads us to today. Blandus was physically sick. At this point, it was obvious that Blandus was the one who modified the beacon's signals. Blandus, the cultist of the deep. But everything was too late. There was a signal coming from Nest 37. The beacon was active. There was no stopping what was going to happen. And if Ulpianus wanted to know more about the church from Blandus, he was out of luck. The cultists protected Blandus themselves, and also stopped protecting him out of nowhere. Blandus himself never really had contact with them. Still, if Ulpianus would let him, Blandus could tell him all about his motivations. You see, right after the failure that was the raid on the Firstborn's lair, all the hunters were proclaimed dead. And right after, Blandus was invited to restart the Abyssal Hunters project. Blandus understood in his heart, violence begets violence. The Abyssal Hunters program was made solely for violence, especially with such a flimsy program that yielded more sacrifices than soldiers. Granted, Aegir never used propaganda to spread the Abyssal Hunters project. Everyone that joined it made an informed decision. But there is no reason why the sacrifices of civilians needs to be the market standard. It shouldn't be accepted so easily. Once upon a time, the Aegir's worth laid in what they had built, but now their very lives and deaths are price tagged. Still, as grand as all that is, Ulpianus still didn't know what Blandus' plan really was. He hijacked the waterway program. Sure, but to do what? Blandus points to a holographic map with a bunch of dots. Some of those dots were the Abyssal Hunters. According to Blandus, even though they were in the heart of Nest 37, they weren't in any danger. The moment they can't fight anymore, the class 4 weapons will put all the Seaborns to sleep. And then, Blandus brings up Ulpianus' failed junction. Blandus had studied that accident. Because of that accident, Ulpianus' body stopped resisting the Seaborn genes, and the Seaborn genes stopped overtaking him. Blandus was able to replicate that on a macro scale. Basically, he could delete the hostility of the Seaborn. That is what Blandus' plan was, and what he meant to do with the hijacked beacons. And before Glaudia's group left for battle, he reproduced that accident on them. But that didn't make sense. How could Blandus recreate such an accident in the 5 years that the Abyssal Hunters weren't present? Unless, of course, he experimented on himself. Blandus was dying. He wasn't built in the same way as Ulpianus. His body couldn't take much more. He tells Ulpianus to tell him that the Hunters weren't made to be tools, but solutions, not something to be tossed aside, which Ulpianus agreed. If so, then the Abyssal Hunters project was truly a failure, but the remaining ones still have a chance to be something else, people not based around violence. The Abyssal Hunters will be the bridge of peace between humanity and Seaborn. If Blandus can make the Seaborn mistake humanity as kin, then maybe they can see Aegir as neighbors, and that could be done through the waterway program, by replicating that freak accident on such a large scale, extinguishing the hostility of the Seaborn using the class 4 weapons. It could be done. The class 4 weapons were always targeted towards the Seaborn's biology, and the beacons would act as auto-adaptive genes. After 200 years of agony, the Seaborn threat would be toppled. The only problem is that Blandus would die, so he needed to entrust his work to someone else, and Ulpianus was right here. But Ulpianus did not humor him. This entire plan, to put it frankly, was dubious. It was fantastical. It was uncertain. Who gave Blandus the right to decide simply what's right? Who gave them the right to risk everything on such a flimsy plan? He had no right. He is simply selfish in his ideals. The Seaborn are the scourge. They are full of unknowns. Some of their recent organs have no similarities to any other living being. And yet, Blandus put all of his hope into symbiosis with such unpredictable creatures, assigning characters to Aegir and Seaborn, anthropomorphizing them to such extents. Tragic. Only a fool would make characters out of biology and society when it comes to science and politics. An easy idea is just that, an easy idea, not an easy action. It would be great if the world was all sunshine and rainbows, if everything just got along, if nothing feared hunger, if the deer wasn't mauled by the wolves. This isn't a story, it's reality. It's not just idealistic, but also disgustingly arrogant. The same arrogance that led Aegir to believe that Abyssal Hunters project would succeed for sure. The same arrogance that has been plaguing them since they first discovered the old civilization. Blandus managed to recreate that accident in singular bodies from the genes. From there, jumping into removing the hostility of an entire species, something only a fool would believe in. Let's say this works. What will the Seaborn become? Magical fairies living at the bottom of the ocean? Beloved house pets? Will Gladia debate with them? Will Scotty drink tea with them? Will Laurentina dance with them? No. Neither Ulpianus nor Blandus could picture such a thing. Think of it like this. Blandus is treating the Seaborn the way you would treat a human. But Seaborn aren't human. They're an entirely different species. I've already made a video on why assigning human values to non-humans wouldn't work. The Seaborn are like the fairies of FGO Lost World 6. They aren't human, plain and simple. So treating them as human, or even as animals, is foolish. The Seaborn are Seaborn. And it's not like after that accident, Ulpianus became immune to the Seaborn genes. He can still get assimilated if he's not careful. It's just the Abyssal Hunter's genes that won't hurt him. The Seaborn have always had one goal, and they have made it abundantly clear. To assimilate, not to make friends or allies. They don't care about politics, they care about their own survival and the assimilation of TERRA as a whole. Nothing else. And all of Blandus' messing around led to the deaths of thousands of Aegir and puts all of Miliarium in danger. All because he put his own thoughts above everyone else's. If Blandus is hopelessly idealistic, Ulpianus is coldly realistic. Ulpianus has no time for justice of any kind, only the path ahead. Blandus, on the other hand, is drowned in idealism. Despite that, they became friends. Because of it, Ulpianus had only one thing left to do: drop his anchor on his friend, executing him for his crimes. In his last moments, all Blandus could think about is that he never managed to give the Abyssal Hunters a welcome home hug. All of that was super dense. Man, I sure hope it gets easier from here. Chapter 14. Jordi catches up with Ulpianus and doesn't question much for his own safety. Now that the weapons have been activated, the Seaborn will become highly unpredictable. Most likely, they will take Blandus' letter of diplomacy and shred it to pieces while acting more aggressively to take advantage of the chance, which means that Gladia's group is in danger. Ulpianus has always been more of an expert on biology, so he won't be able to use the beacon launcher to signal them to retreat. Thankfully, there is a reason why Jordi is here. So, Ulpianus decides to leave the work to Jordi. But sadly, at this point, there was no way to resume control over the tower. But then again, Jordi is built different, so he starts pressing buttons to just shut it down. Jordi takes the opportunity to ask Ulpianus why he thought that Jordi was Breogan's descendant, to which Ulpianus tells him that he missed the mark. Jordi isn't blood related to Breogan. Even so, Jordi has definitely inherited his wisdom. Ulpianus starts telling Jordi about Breogan's history. Breogan also was always in a journey, always searching for a way forward, just as Jordi has been doing for 2 events now. Conversely, if Jordi shared blood with Breogan and nothing else, that would be far more shameful than anything else. And with that, finally, Jordi managed to send some signals to Nest 37, but that doesn't put the hunters in any less danger. Just as they had finished their work and were about to retreat, the Seaborn all started swarming the beacon, while the Seaborn eggs were multiplying rapidly. Normally, Class 4 weapons were supposed to kill the newborn while they're making the adults flee. From there, all the Seaborn vegetation would decay. But due to a certain scientist's meddling, the Seaborn became stronger than ever. And because of the secret surgery Blandus did on the autoadaptive junctions of the hunters also were feeling drowsy and weaker than usual. They had to flee fast. Back in the beacon launcher, the air was getting heavier as well, and not only that, the Seaborn were right above the beacon launcher. Because of Blandus' blunders, the Seaborn knew the city inside out. The hunt was truly on. The hunters became the hunted. This is when the last night shows up. He destroys Miliarium, he goes to Aegir, he kills everyone, he kills Horatio, he goes to land, he kills Originium, he kills the priestess, he kills Thyrsis, and then he goes back to the ocean and none of that happens, and I just wake up. Chapter 15. Very quickly, Miliarium was turning into a nest, starting from the beacon launcher tower. And of course, the only people rejoicing were the cultists of the deep. Thankfully, like Fish mcgee, some of them are stupid, so Secunda finds some of them and captures them. Still, the situation was horrible. Clementia ordered all of the Class 4 weapons to be strictly shut down, and for all of the military to stay in Miliarium. Despite everything, Miliarium was still the safest place in the sea. From what Kelchi could tell, the seaborne nests all over the nearby ocean were expanding rapidly, merging the other sides alone. And of course, in the middle of all the nests was Miliarium. Clementia wanted to take full responsibility as the consul of Miliarium, but there was still work to be done. They could still fight. The streets weren't filled with panic. Miliarium still was relatively calm. Most likely because the Aegir have been struggling against the Seaborn for centuries, so the infestation of the city isn't as much of a shock. First things first, Clementia had to help her guests, Dr. Kelchi and other, evacuate. It would be rather shameful if they got caught up in Aegir's troubles. In the beacon tower, Ulpianus and Jordi were struggling. The way Blandus' biosignals worked is rather complicated, but basically the signals worked as a bridge. Basically, Blandus exchanged the knowledge and structure of the Aegir for peace, but the Seaborn did not reciprocate. They simply fed on the information and learned all about Miliarium, and now all they wanted to do was assimilate. Jordi asks Ulpianus if anything can be done, and Ulpianus tells them that they have one chance. They need to eject the city unit the beacon tower stands on out of Miliarium. This internal assimilation is the most frightening thing at the moment. The city still has a purpose, it cannot be abandoned. So, all they can do is fight. If they don't, the Seaborn will take over and eventually invade the shores of Iberia, and more. Ulpianus takes Jordi to the control center of the city, but it's no use. No matter how much Jordi messes around, the control center doesn't respond. But Jordi knows someone who could probably help. Avitus. He remembers Avitus messing around and fixing little handy ones. So obviously he also knows how to control the control center. Of course! Of course, Jordi! No, wow! Such a genius, she's so cute, oh my god! Jordi. Love you, Jordi. Never change. Ulpianus tells them to leave for now and look for the Sea Patrol. They should be able to help him locate Avitus. Ulpianus himself decides to stay and defend the tower for as long as possible. Afterwards, Secunda shows up and meets up with Ulpianus. Despite everything, she decides to trust him for now and aid Jordi because as she sees it, ejecting the tower is truly the best plan here. Going back to Clementia, she managed to take the Doctor and Kelchi all the way to the Theatrum. From here, they should be able to evacuate once it's time. She herself has to remain and command. Unexpectedly though, the systems of Miliarium start getting hacked. A large system breach. Not only that, they also lost access to all the comms. Someone had cut off the Theatrum from the rest of the city. And just then, Kelchi senses danger. Sitting atop the Theatrum was a lone Seaborn, an unusually shaped one. It also lacked hostility, even after Kelchi tried to attack it with Monster. They could tell the Seaborn was once human, an Aegir. Slowly, the Seaborn looked at the Doctor and the rest. At least, it seemed. It was otherworldly, it lacked many features you would expect from a living being. It stared with no eyes, and spoke with no mouth.
There is no justice here, only the path ahead.
Of course, the original identity of the Seaborn could be none other than the greatest scientist of Aegir, the user of that very same proverb, and the man who had built the Sophontheatrum, Martus, the man who had gone missing over 200 years ago. The only things of his that remained were his goggles and possibly his mind. Most of all, he wanted to converse with the doctor, with the only remaining human from the old civilization. Not only that, he knew the true name of Kelchi, of Aegir 10. He had been waiting for these two remnants of destruction and despair for a very long time. Chapter 16. Martus was aware of the hole in the sky, and if he knew about it, then so did Kelchi. So he asked her how long it would take for the hole to close again. It was clear. The reason why the Seaborn were getting more and more aggressive, more and more desperate to get into land, is because of the hole that was opened in the sky a year back by Christian Wright of Colombia. The Seaborn's survival instincts forced them to stay aware of their environments. Because of that, they knew that horrors that lurked in space were dangerous enough to wipe out the old civilization at least. In short, the thing that slowly wiped out the Doctor's civilization in the past was something or things that went by observers. We don't know what the observers truly are. What we do know is that the ancient civilization did everything to combat it and failed. And the barrier in the sky was one of the things they made to defend TERRA, and it did its job well, until Christian Wright broke it. I'm not gonna go over the Lone Trail, so that's all the context we're getting about Christian. Point is, TERRA, or life, was in danger, and so Martus wanted the Doctor and Kelchi's help. Martus wanted the Seaborn to evolve more rapidly. The Seaborn need to explore the vast void above, and while they could grow wings, wings alone would be insufficient, but with the help of someone like Kelchi, they could find a better evolution. You see, the Seaborn didn't just appear out of nowhere. As I mentioned, the old civilization tried many things to combat the observers, from the barrier to the encasing of the Doctor, to Aegir 10, to Friston, to Reginium, to the Seaborn. But the Seaborn were never meant to be the Seaborn. This was completely out of expectations. Something must have happened. It was 200 years ago that the Seaborn started ravaging the sea, around the same time that Martus disappeared. So, Kelchi asks him, how did the Seaborn become what they are now? And Martus tells her, whatever convinces her to help. So, he tells her about the biggest success that Aegir could ever dream of. In the expedition he went missing in, him and his crew found one of the old structures of their predecessors. A sanctuary. They were searching for relics, for information, but what he found was hope. Along the way, he was separated with his crew. He was the only one to witness a giant, a sleeping leviathan. A single limb of his stuck to the glass, and without thinking, Martus reached out. He could feel its warmth. And right after, visions.
Fallen cities under an oppressively hanging dome, the lamp aflame, the stargate extinguished, the star ring broken, the road network shattered.
The destruction of the prehistoric civilization, and yet the visions didn't stop.
Cold, lifeless plains and darkness without end, burnt out stars and ever-expanding black holes.
Nothing was familiar, everything was foreign, existence itself was lost. It was nothingness, the empty void of space, and all those images were replaced by another, one that was chaotic, visions of an entity and its children consuming every last thing, assimilating the world itself, and at the end he would murmur,
Survive.
Over and over.
Survive. 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 Survive.
The poor Leviathan was trapped in a dream. His duty had stagnated and he was left all alone. So, Martus woke him up. His story was weird. Originally, the Leviathans were created as arks. They could foster independent habitats inside their own bodies with their own ecosystems. If anything happened, the old Civ would leverage that nature to terraform whatever land they wanted to. The project itself was very mature as well and could keep itself running for almost an eternity. So how did they stagnate? How did they lose their sense of duty? Despite what Kelshi might lead you to believe, the old Civ had some stupid ideas as well. These Leviathans were originally pheromones, which are basically godlike monstrosities. The old Civ tamed some of them and started this Ark project. Point is, the duty given to these pheromones didn't originally belong to them. Isharmla wasn't created to be an Ark, yet the old civilization attempted to make him into one. Hell, the name Isharmla didn't belong to him either. It was given to him by the old Civ scientists. Think of it like this. A pit bull lives to eat babies. Now, you could probably train it to herd sheep, and could be successful. But at the end of the day, pit bulls aren't meant to herd sheep. They are meant to swallow infants. Even if you train them, you can't get rid of their nature, of their supposed duty. So, all the Leviathans started getting bolder, wilder, and more ambitious for their survival in order to rise against the nature given to them. Possibly resentment. However, after that, things changed again. Let's continue this talk with just Isharmla and leave the rest of the Leviathans. Isharmla was evolving via the habitat inside it, but that was too slow. Because of that, after Martus woke him up, he started releasing the creatures he made to the outside world, so that these creatures could find more powerful genes to nourish him. Which leads us to now. Because of the hole in the sky, the Seaborns have become more aggressive. While Isharmla might be dead, kind of, the other Leviathans still exist, even if dormant. Now, how about Martus? Martus knew that the Aegir were strong and capable. They would be wonderful nourishment for the many. But the Aegir resisted. Thankfully, Martus was a smart man with wicked connections. Secretly, he cultivated the cult of the deep inside Aegir. Thing is, Martus never truly forced anyone to be a cultist. Actually, the cult doesn't really exist. What does though is Martus's influence. He had no forums, no debates, only sincere conversations with some folks, and those folk were willing to give the Seaborn a chance, all with their own logic. Martus didn't have to create any philosophy. People could do that themselves. They could create their own justice. It didn't matter as long as they helped nourish the Seaborn. With a few pointed questions, anyone can reach the conclusion you want, after all. They just have to ask the right questions. They could worship the Firstborn, work for their own ideals, it didn't matter. Not as long as they played their part well. Martus has more charisma than Breogan could ever dream of. The doctor tells him that it all sounds like a scam, but Martus doesn't see it that way. Every quote-unquote cultist had only one reason to become cultists: to survive better. It's not about primordial worship or anything, just survival. Which leads us to the philosophy of Martus. The doctor asks him, whose survival is he talking about? And Martus tells him,
the survival of life itself.
The path of life.
There is no justice here, only the path ahead.
That is all it boils down to. The survival of anything means the end of many other things. Here, in the Theatrum, where Aegir debate for days on end, where all of culture and science is stored, the Theatrum Martus himself made, there was a debate. Not a battle, but a debate. And the debate always has multiple parties. He knew what his ideals meant. Unlike Blandus, he was aware of the consequences of his own actions. And yet, he feels no remorse. Because of him, humanity as a whole suffered. This whole struggle was made real. For the sake of Aegir, for the sake of who he once was, he had to be put down. And so, Clementia raises her sword and Kelshi readies monster. They break the device he used to control the Theatrum and continued the debate. This abomination had no place on TERRA. This is when the last night comes in and he kills Martus and kills the doctor. He kills Clementia on a pike. He goes out, he kills Ulpianus, he kills Jordi, and then he leaves and he's victorious. Yes, no, it doesn't happen. Still, chapter 16. Avitus knew of everything. He was telling as much to Cassia. Well, he didn't know about Martus, but he knew what the cultists were doing within Miliarium. And yet, he did nothing. He told no one, not because he sided with the cultists, but because he was hollow. He knew that there was a high chance that Miliarium wouldn't survive. And yet, he was here. He didn't intend to survive. Still, he felt guilt. He should have said something. He shouldn't have let so many people die. This was his depression, his problem. He shouldn't have risked the lives of others for his own misery. But it didn't matter. A Seaborn was in front of him, and just as he was about to be killed, he gets saved by Jordi. Jordi was scared, yet he was fighting. Cassia ran away with Secunda following, leaving the two alone. Jordi knew Avitus wasn't evil, but he was still disappointed. Avitus tells him to run, but Jordi had no plans to. He read The Death of Life. Hell, he talked about it with Avitus, and yet, he still can't relate to its pessimism. Does the destruction of civilization weigh more than a city? Or a person? Does it matter? Jordi can't tell. He had some feelings he held about Avitus. He had mentioned that him and his lover were planning on raising a baby. And yet, his lover changed her mind, and because of that, she died in depression. And so, Jordi asks him if Avitus' wife died in fear of the future, or in depression from the disappointment she felt towards Avitus. Wow. Jordi, what? Damn! Cold! Leaving that aside, Irene rescues the two of them and helps them get to where they need to be. And with that, Avitus and Jordi start fixing the control center. Ulpianus was still defending his post, until Glaudia found him. She and the rest of the hunters managed to survive. They were in grave danger, having lost most of their battle senses, and were about to be swallowed by the Seaborn until the great, immaculate, muscular, long John having great smelling last night saved them! And he killed them with Seaborn and he ate their corpses, showing them the true meaning of insanity and cool. For real this time, yeah! Yes! He actually appeared and did something. Of course, as a friend of Ulpianus, he had to do his job. Still, that doesn't change the fact that Miliarium is falling. Thankfully, Jordi managed to fix the control center so the tower could be ejected, and soon it would be ejected. Ulpianus told Glaudia to leave. Ulpianus himself still had too many questions. There was no place for him in Aegir. So, he had to do things his own way for the sake of Aegir. He has to assimilate to a point. Until he learns all of the Seaborn's secrets, he would have to act as one of them while gathering information. Glaudia tells him that he will have many chances to learn more back in Aegir, but Ulpianus has no plans of changing his mind. If she wants to learn more that way, that's fine. He won't disapprove. But they need to learn more about the Seaborn from more angles, more approaches in order to secure victory. Of course, it's a ludicrous plan, but unlike with Blandus, this puts only him in danger. Ulpianus only deals in certainties, and if he isn't certain, he will risk only himself. And hell, if that bastard last night can resist the call of the V-Many, then so can Ulpianus. And a bit later, the city of Miliarium rose up to the sea level, visible from Iberia's shores. This way, the Seaborn would have a harder time infiltrating the city. Soon, this would all be over. Chapter 17. Secunda catches Cassio, which should be the last cultist hiding in Miliarium. Clementia, having gained back access to the rest of Miliarium, announces the city's plans. Basically, after fully ejecting the beacon tower, the city has to break through the Seaborn encirclement and drift to land. That way, they won't be surrounded. In the meantime, everyone had to hold on and fight. And with the return of the Abyssal Hunters, everything should be easier. Going back to the Theatrum, the debate wasn't truly over. Clementia had more questions to ask. From what he said, everything that happened in the old civilization ruins was an inevitability, which is why he woke up Isharbala. But, if you remember correctly, I mentioned that Martus was an eccentric man when I first went over him. He was the type of person to continue debating a topic with himself even after everyone had reached the obvious conclusion. He explored all avenues and worked solely with certainties. It's why he made the Theatrum terminals. And yet, he quickly decided to work with Isharbala and became possibly the worst Seaborn, all over some visions. It was more mystical than Martus recorded in history. At first, Martus questioned why someone would want to know so much, and why it would even matter, before deciding to answer anyway. The human that ate the flesh of the Seaborn and became a Seaborn in the old ruins. How long did it take him to reach that conclusion? Hours? Days? Weeks? It didn't matter, time was meaningless. What mattered is that he feared and doubted. He was compelled to think of every last possibility. Where would the next disaster come from? When? How? Why? He had to comprehend the incomprehensible. So, he had to think a different way. What sort of life form could live, fight, and persist? What sort of being could survive against the unknown? And how would it be born? If he had infinite time, he would have figured it out. But time was finite. He thought back to the visions. Isharbala had seen the death of civilization, and even the future. Let's say, could the Seaborn carry the torch of life? If they could, given the limited time, could they instinctually iterate, evolve in a way to survive? How large of a population would there need to be? How efficient? How much would him and his kind have to devour? The sea, the planet, the stars? How many had to die for the survival of just one species? And if even they couldn't, then who could? Someone on the other side of the ocean? The sky? Void itself? Point is, Martus was incredibly lacking in information. It's like trying to solve a mathematical problem that doesn't give you any letters or numbers. Even so, he had to think of something. After seeing visions of destruction, what else could he do? A mind like Martus could never ignore something like that. He could never ignore the destruction of life. He could never look past the annihilation of the future. Clementia tells him that he could have asked for Aegir's help, but he didn't see that as a solution. The choices of countless many, or the few, whose choice is more right? Suppose the only way for life itself to survive didn't lie with humanity, and in turn, the Aegir. It lied in something else. How would they react? Again, Martus never cared about justice, only the path ahead. He simply did not care about humanity as a whole. He believed that the Fernwood he saw at the bottom of the ocean had a higher chance of survival than humanity. Humanity, old Civ, once lost, would it truly be wise to put faith in them again? For the sake of moving forward, Martus would not hesitate. And once he saw a little baby Seaborn back in the lab coming towards him, he chose to eat it and become the Martus he is now. He assimilated of his own free will. From there started the Seaborn Revolution. He saw humanity as a shackle. Aegir always were against genetic enhancements, at least until the Abyssal Hunters project. They saw such things as an insult to life itself. But that is not the mindset of a survivor, but a pretender. A way of thinking for the privileged. Meanwhile, the Seaborn only desire survival. They assimilate and change rapidly, evolving in whatever ways they can. They don't have the same shackles that humanity does. So, if anything were to survive the Observers, or whatever other threats existed beyond TERRA, it would be the Seaborn. If there's a lifeform that can survive the future no matter what, it's worth fighting for, unlike a lifeform that refuses to let go of its weaknesses. Kelshi and the Doctor had engaged with many villains in the past. They all had made hard choices, but none were as horrifying as the man in front of them. Throughout all of his monologuing, he never once denied the fact that he's dooming TERRA as a whole. He never denied his conquest of tragedy. He only lives for survival and nothing else. He abandoned his humanity all for the sake of existing. But is such a way of survival really that precious? Surviving for the sake of surviving. Despite everything, people don't want to abandon their sadness, anger, happiness, and aspirations, all for the sake of surviving. Most people want to burn out rather than fade away. They want to live for their wants. Survival isn't an end goal. Sure, sometimes all people can do is survive. But why do they survive? For the sake of living? Fighting and persisting? No. People live for their own desires, for their wants and wonders. Survival is only a daily objective, not an actual aspiration. Even people that want to become immortal do so out of desire to experience what the future has to offer. Basically, Martus is arguing for mindless immortality. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Kelshi argue for fragile experience. Whichever one you believe in doesn't matter, because neither has any plans of changing their minds. Martus asks them if they refuse to assimilate and help his kind evolve, then what other plan do they have? Incubate Originium? The countless other failed experiments the old civilization already tried? Aima 10 should have reached the same conclusion as him. She wandered the land for thousands of years, and has seen the rise and fall of many kingdoms and empires. Martus simply saw the spark of the old civilization and chose to become a survivalist. Kelshi was created in order to find a way for civilization to survive, and yet she thinks the opposite of him. Unless it's because of the influence of the Doctor. Watch my Babel video. Martus had seen his DNA and fingerprints all over Isharmla's lair. He must have visited the depths of the ocean before. Even so, the Doctor was gifted amnesia, so he doesn't remember any of that. Either way, the visions that Martus saw were just that. Visions. To the Doctor, they must have been reality even if he doesn't remember them. He has existed and has been fighting for hope despite all the destruction. Despite having witnessed nothingness once, even if it was before his amnesia. At the very least, Martus could respect them for that. Still, they have been debating for far too long. This battle must come to an end no matter what. Martus won't stop fighting for life. He will never change his views. So, he asks the people in front of him one final time. Will they choose humanity, Originium, or the Seaborn? Of course, the answer was obvious. Finally, to end this chapter, Jordi and Irene managed to return to Iberia and report everything to Carmen. Iberia had only one thing to do, and that was to assist Miliarium. Suddenly, the lighthouses of Iberia, of which only one was active, started activating all at once, responding to some kind of technology. It took half of Sulfra to activate just one, and yet, they were all activating at the same time. Along the surface of the sea was a large lance of light, surrounded with nanomachines. Finally, the Aegir home territories managed to reconnect with Miliarium, and it was because of that Iberia's lighthouses started shining once more. And in the beacon tower that was ejected into the depths of the ocean, Ulpianus was still fighting with Seaborn. Most likely, he would assimilate at some point. No one would remember his sacrifice. Even so, he had no desire to stop. He needed to know more about the Seaborn. He needed to figure them out once and for all. For the sake of Aegir, he would do whatever it takes, even if, most likely, he would never see the sun again. Chapter 18. After all the debates, Martus left the theatrum and started to go somewhere else. Coincidentally, that's where Skadi was, and being that Skadi held the consciousness of Isharmla inside her, they couldn't risk Martus doing something he wasn't supposed to do. So, the doctor chased after him. Now that the home territories were here, it was only a matter of time until the Seaborn surrounding Miliarium got eradicated. Still, Clementia and the others had to talk to a consul from the home territories through a hologram. So, Gladia, Kelshi, and Clementia started talking with Horatia, the mother of Gladia and one of the most influential consuls of all of Aegir. Taking a page out of Blandus' book, Aegir made nanomachines that would be kin to the Seaborn. The nanomachines had to give up information to the Seaborn in order to take information from them. The same symbiosis Blandus tried to exploit, but to a way lesser degree and actually useful. Sort of the same thing that Ulpianus wants to do with himself. The real annoyance though is the fact that Kelshi could tell that while Aegir does want to connect to the land in order to take out the Seaborn, Aegir also had its eyes on the other unnatural phenomena present on TERRA. But Horatia sees nothing wrong with that. All the Aegir have to do is share their knowledge. They can help Jarok industrialize. They can aid Sami with the extermination of the otherworldly demons. They can calm Ursus's need for conquest down and help Castle revive. Bolivar and Higashi, with bots and negotiation, they too would open their borders. Aegir will aid in everything, and in turn every nation will stand under Aegir. After all, Aegir knows best. Kelshi could tell that she was sincere from her thoughts, but they're still bad. There's a reason why globalism can't work. There will always be divide. Everywhere, cultures are different. Trying to globalize TERRA under the Aegir, the other nations would never take too kindly to that, and would resist. Before acting, Aegir must learn more, not with drones, but with meetings. Horatia would be willing to listen, as long as Aegir isn't held back by needless caution. Again, the Aegir are arrogant, to say the least. Horatia asked Gladia if she thinks similarly to Kelshi, which, of course, she did. And after that, Gladia and Kelshi left, leaving Clementia and Horatia alone. With everything that Blandus managed to do, one thing was clear. There were a lot of cultists in the higher-ups of Aegir. Everyone involved in the creation and management of the Class 4 weapons had to be put under strict supervision. The cultists had to be rooted out. Another thing that bothered Clementia, though, is that most likely Horatia knew that the Waterway program would be filled with sacrifices. In the end, the Waterway program did succeed. It worked. Only after Miliarium was subject to a direct assault by the Seaborn. There was still a lot that Aegir needed to do. Horatia could only hope that Clementia could stop frowning like that. Going back to Martus, he spots Skadi, Isharmla. Of course, Martus had been meaning to talk to her as well. Unlike other people, Skadi wasn't nutritious for the Seaborn. She was the end, the hunter. It was only a matter of time before she turned into Isharmla, until she evolved into what she slayed. Martus and Skadi had a natural affinity. They were the two most close to Isharmla after all. In the truest sense, they could be considered family. And perhaps, in the end, the only one to survive will be Skadi. In other words, Isharmla. Quickly, the doctor stood beside Skadi. Martus was surprised to know that the doctor knew Skadi. and once the doctor declared that she was one of his cute little operators, Martus was ecstatic. For the first time since the doctor saw him, Martus was unable to control himself out of joy. He didn't know what exactly the doctor had to do with the Isharmla experiment. He just knew that the doctor was involved. And after thousands of years, he stood beside Isharmla again. The doctor, the only remaining human from the old civilization, standing alongside the Seaborn's greatest hope. Soon after, Martus left Liaria once and for all. He couldn't wait to see how those two would evolve. With that, surely the Seaborn would win at some point. The doctor stopped Scotty from chasing him. After all, the city is the most important thing at the moment. Scotty hated how she felt near Martus. The kinship, the call of the wee many. She never wanted to become Isharmla. Actually, she never will. She will resist. This time, it was the doctor that woke her up from her daze. Next time, it could be her waking him up. Either way, the two would stand side by side, alongside the other hunters and Rhodes Island. Nothing could ever stop the menace that is human tenacity. I mean, look at the last night. Chapter 19. Aegir hacked the devices of every nation on TERRA in order to send a message. Their speech was simple. TERRA was going to face greater and greater threats. TERRA as a whole needed to form a community under the leadership of Aegir. The matrix was broken, the starport was shattered, leaving a hole in the sky. And with that, to every nation, they sent great information. From geographical data on some of the most dangerous parts of TERRA, to images from even farther away from the continent, to much more. After all, sharing knowledge was essential. Now that the battle was basically over, Jordi was walking among the shores of Iberia, alongside Avitus. Avitus still believed in history, but not ruin. Throughout history, there has been countless victories as well. It would be short-sighted to look past them entirely. As for his wrongdoings, Aegir decided not to punish him. After all, he never actually helped the Church of the Deep. He only didn't talk about what he saw and knew. And because he was rather celebrated as a researcher and an author, Aegir left him alone. He could continue his work. But he had other plans. He wanted to roam the land. His first stop would be Rim Billington. He wanted to know more about TERRA and wanted to leave Aegir behind for a while. Better die in some expedition than die wallowing in self-pity. Burn out rather than fade away. And he was now inviting Jordi on his journey. Jordi could make the choice himself. Hell, he didn't have to do it now, just until the departure of Avitus. And with that, he leaves. After that, Carmen approaches Jordi. He was impressed with Jordi. Jordi managed to work well. It seems he only locks in when things are dire. Even so, Jordi wanted to return to Grand Faro, his hometown. It would be a shame, but Carmen could let him go. But Jordi corrects him. Jordi doesn't want to leave the Inquisition. He simply wants more answers, and believes that he can find them on Grand Faro. Still, that is fine. Now that he visited Aegir and returned, he knows his options. Before then, he didn't even have that. Now, he can choose a path for himself. Whether it's to continue working with the Inquisition, work for Aegir, or journey with Avitus, he can do whatever he wants. His paths are clear. After that, we get a dream sequence. The sanctuary where Isharmla resided 200 years ago. And the thing reaching out, touching the creature's limb through the glass, separating them. But this isn't Martus's memories. This is Isharmla's memories. But that didn't matter. Quickly, he woke up. In front of Martus was Ulpianus. Soon the all-out war between the Aegir and the Seaborn would commence. And yet, the Seaborn were retreating back into the abyss. Why? What exactly are their plans? How will they fight? Ulpianus had to know. Ulpianus knew of Martus' existence. He knew that the Seaborn in front of him was the founder of the Church of the Deep. And Martus could tell that Ulpianus didn't want to become a Seaborn. He was resisting just enough to stay sane, while feeding on information through the link that the V-Many share. And Martus would tell him everything, as long as Ulpianus became a part of the V-Many. Simply conjoining flesh wasn't enough. Ulpianus had to turn endurance into acceptance, humiliation to elation, and leave himself to his instincts. And once he goes through all of that, he will be unable to, no, unwilling to return to Aegir, just as Martus could not. After that, Martus starts moving, and Ulpianus simply follows along. There is only one thing to go over in this video, the dichotomy of Ulpianus and Martus. This is an Ulpianus video. It goes over what he does, his history and motivations. But this is also a Martus video, and here is why Martus and Ulpianus are the same person. Not literally, but ideologically. There is no justice here, only the path ahead. That quote embodies the both of them. They're both immensely pragmatic. You could say that they both embody the spirits of Aegir itself. When it came to Ulpianus and Blandus, they were different in pretty much every way. The only things that they had in common are that they were both scientists and that they both were dudes. Other than that, everything about them was different. With Ulpianus and Martus, they are both the exact same person. The pragmatism that led Ulpianus to work on the Abyssal Hunters project and kill every failure of that program is the same pragmatism that led Martus to Isharmla and had him assimilate into the V-Many. They don't care about morality or immorality. Neither is particularly idealistic. They both focus on one thing, the path forward. Here is where they differ. Martus fights for life itself. He fights for the survival of existence, the path of life. Ulpianus, on the other hand, fights solely for the Aegir, for Aegir's culture, dreams, and life, the path of civilization. Life itself has no culture, it has no dreams, nor aspirations. So, Martus doesn't fight for any of that. Even if Isharmla wanted to do something, he wouldn't care, not as long as Isharmla survived. Ulpianus, meanwhile, fights for the present. You can't fight for the life of civilization. There is more to it. Ulpianus has to fight for more than existence if he wants to fight for Aegir. Another thing is their attitudes towards questions. Ulpianus never tries to influence someone else subtly. Whenever someone asks a wrong question, he doesn't answer, not until they ask a question beneficial to them. Martus, on the other hand, abuses the manipulative nature that he knows that some questions can have. He asked pointed questions and made people ask him pointed questions for answers that would eventually lead to the creation of the Church of the Deep. That is how he founded the cult. Another thing is that the two of them both liked certainties, but both acted differently when they couldn't reach a certainty. Martus looked to a higher power. If he couldn't find the answer to survival, then he had to go for the best possible answer he could come up with, which was Isharmla. He didn't care about dooming everyone else. All that mattered to him was the survival of life. Ulpianus, meanwhile, is self-sacrificial. Whenever he isn't certain, he makes sure that he himself is the sole person bearing responsibility. He was the one who was first experimented on in the Abyssal Hunters program, just in case something went wrong. He was the only one who executed all the failures born of the Abyssal Hunters genes. Only he had to bear the guilt. And in the end, he was the only one who decided to infiltrate the Seaborn. Ulpianus holds himself accountable for his own actions. Martus doesn't. He never cared about humanity nor accountability towards others. Lastly, Ulpianus, despite how he is self-aware. He knows about how pragmatic he is. He knows that not everyone will be like him. Not only that, he doesn't want people to be like him. It's why he doesn't let Secunda in on the Abyssal Hunters program, because she was the same as him. There could only be one Ulpianus. Meanwhile, Martus expects everyone to accept his logic. What he says makes sense to him, but not others. At least, not when he's being fully honest. At the end of the day, while the two are pretty much the same person, they act differently. Martus is Ulpianus. Ulpianus is Martus. The only thing that disconnects them from each other is what they fight for. One for life, the other for civilization. Question is, how the hell is Ulpianus in Rhodes Island? Well, every now and then he resurfaces to share information to Rhodes Island, and while he does that, every time he comes back, he gets more and more assimilated. Who knows how long he can hold on? Either way, that's the end of this video. I love Martus, he's my favorite Arknights antagonist. Unlike most, he stands out. Ulpianus is also a great character as well, like most of the dudes from Arknights. This video turned out longer than I wanted it to, but it is what it is. Like, subscribe, comment, dislike, give me engagements. I read all the comments. The last knight comes in to kill everyone.